2 Northwest Colin Philpott reports on Britain's first true light rapid transit system, a metro for Manchester.
120,000 people pour into the centre of Manchester each day to work, to shop or just to enjoy their leisure time. The numbers are on the increase. Since 1981 the daily total has gone up 20% and the latest surveys predict further increases. The vast majority come by car and even with recent road improvements, congestion seems to be getting worse. Delays are not only annoying and costly to the individual traveller, but also damaging to the economy and to the environment.
Clearly there is conflict in town. Too many people, too many motor vehicles. And one way to solve that conflict is to be more strict about entry to city centres by cars, which is what our European neighbours have done. So the city centre is for people, not for cars. You can come towards the city centre, but not in the city centre. So they've reserved the city centre for people and public transport.
If more people made the journey by public transport, the problem of congestion would be eased. At present, only 14% of Manchester's commuters travel by train. There are several reasons for this, but perhaps the most important is the location of the city's main railway stations. Piccadilly, Oxford Road, Deansgate, Salford and Victoria are all away from the real centre of the city. Ironically, the one station which was nearer the heart of things, Central, was closed 20 years ago. So for most rail travellers, getting to work or to the shops means another journey by bus or on foot once they've got off the train to reach their actual destination.
With Metrolink there's going to be a big improvement because for those lines which will be served by Metrolink, which will be initially the Altrincham and the Bury lines, the train will take you straight into the city centre without any delay at all. You won't need to change. You'll be dropped off in the middle of the city, much nearer the shops, the offices, where you work, where you want to get to.
Almost since Manchester's railways were completed, schemes have been mooted to fill in the missing gap. Back in 1878 there were plans for an underground rail link between Piccadilly, Victoria and Central stations. It was a similar idea, the so-called Pick-Vic link, which came close to fruition in the 1970s, but the cost, even then put at £118 million, was deemed too high. The scheme involved an underground link across the city with 5 stations: Piccadilly Low Level, below the mainline terminus, Princes Street at its junction with Whitworth Street, Albert Square, St Peter's Square, serving the central business district, Market Street near the main shopping area, and Victoria Low Level underneath the British Rail station. Now though, the Metrolink scheme, the latest solution to Manchester's rail problems, does seem almost certain to get off the ground. It's a light rail system with tram-like vehicles running on tracks embedded into the city centre streets, taking electric power from overhead cables. The same vehicles will run through on the existing suburban rail lines, which will be converted to light rail. The first phase of the project, due for completion in 1991, at a cost of around £90 million, will link the north and south sides of Manchester, using the Bury to Victoria and Altrincham to Piccadilly lines.
What it looks like being at this stage is a through service from Bury and from Altrincham into Piccadilly. And if you want to go straight across the city centre in the off-peak period, you would change at Piccadilly Gardens. In the peak period, there will be sort of short distance workings or shuttle workings between, say, Whitefield and Timperley, which will go straight across the city centre. But obviously we shall be doing more research into exact patterns of people, and as time evolves you can go straight across the city or you can go into Piccadilly, Undercroft and change there, whichever way you want.
Suppose you were coming in to Victoria.
Yes.
Where will it go from there?
Well, from Victoria the station will be within the existing concourse of the station, just similar to where the Bury lines are now, across Corporation Street, into Balloon Street, and then into High Street. So it will give you access to Market Street, the Arndale Centre and Fountain Street. It will then curve round Lewis's Corner and go straight down Mosley Street. But also there'll be the triangular junction now with the branch to Piccadilly Gardens and to Piccadilly Undercroft Station. The other line will go straight down Mosley Street, across Princes Street into St Peter's Square. It then wiggles round the Midland Hotel to the back of the Midland Hotel and up what is called the GMEX ramp, which will go up to the GMEX station, and there'll also be the bridge across into the existing Deansgate BR station.
Light rail is a well-established concept elsewhere in Europe and North America, where many cities, even comparatively small ones, see it as a solution to their traffic problems. It's relatively cheap, quick to build and environmentally friendly. Britain is coming onto the scene rather late in the day, with the Docklands Railway in London, opened in 1987, the only major example of a recent scheme. Blackpool, of course, was clever enough to keep its tram system when all around were losing theirs, although tourist potential rather than traffic congestion was the main motive. Now though, 21 towns and cities are considering light rail schemes with varying degrees of seriousness. Sheffield, Leeds, Bristol and the West Midlands are well advanced, but other places, including Chester, have feasibility studies underway.
Light rail is a compromise between buses and underground. It has the advantage of electricity, therefore it's quiet, clean, and it's guided so you know where it's going to go. And on the other hand, it has some of the advantages of buses, namely that it's relatively small units and they can move in smaller circles so you can get into tighter corners than an underground. So it's essentially a halfway house between underground and buses. Why not buses? Well, in some towns, bus lanes might make a very sensible first step to identifying a market for light rail. And this is certainly what's happened in some European towns. They've improved the bus service, found that patronage picked up, and therefore they've invested in light rail. And if you look at some of the Swiss towns, they've got to the stage now where they're talking about phasing out their buses and substituting light rail.
On Tyneside, they went for a different solution. The Metro, opened in 1980, also used existing suburban rail lines linked by new city centre stretches, but these are underground. Digging tunnels is expensive though. The Tyne and Wear Metro cost £280 million 10 years ago. Despite the extra cost of going underground, some believe it's ultimately a better investment and appropriate for Manchester.
Light rail is, as the name implies, it is light, and you cannot mix light railway vehicles on the same tracks with conventional intercity or freight trains in case there's an accident. So you have to, the only lines they can convert to Metrolink are those that don't carry freight, intercity and other British Rail passenger services. Now that is a minority of lines in Manchester. The majority do carry other rail traffic.
And why exactly would an underground system enable you to bring in more?
Well, the thing about the underground is that once you get the tunnels in place in the centre, then you can feed all the local rail services in. There isn't the need to segregate an underground railway service from other railway services.
Because you can run the same type of trains?
On the same tracks, that's right.
An underground in many ways is better because it takes the trains off the streets, but it's enormously expensive.
It will be, yes, because it's going to be bigger, it's going to be better. But I think the total cost is irrelevant anyway, because if you take the total cost of Metrolink, we can't afford that. What they're doing with Metrolink is they're building it phase by phase. So in other words, you build as much as you can afford within your current expenditure limit. And as with Metrolink, well, you would do the same with an underground.
The advantage of light rail is that it's much cheaper to build, it can be built more quickly, so you get the benefits more quickly, and it's more accessible. The stops can be closer together, you don't have so far to walk, you don't have the long time to go down up and down escalators. And the study I did in Budapest some years ago showed that for many journeys people spend more time on the escalator than they do on the metro train, and it was quicker for most of them to have gone by bus than to go on the metro. So I think the advantage of the light rail is it's much more accessible, easy to get at, and although it doesn't go as fast as a metro train would go at, the journey from door to door is actually faster for most of the journeys people make.
Gentlemen, this is the formal opening of the tenders for the phase 1 of the Metrolink project. We've received 3 tenders, first of all from the GMA Group, secondly from the Hawke Siddeley Consortium, and thirdly from the Trafalgar House Brell Consortium. I propose, first of all, to open the one for the Hawker-Siddeley consortium.
Whatever alternatives there might have been, it's the Metrolink system that's going ahead.
The successful consortia out of 3 who reached the second stage is the GMA consortia.
2 weeks ago, the consortium chosen to build and operate it was announced. It comprises the electrical giant GEC, the construction firms Molam and AMEC, and GM Buses.
The interesting thing about the consortium is they all have complementary skills. In other words, people don't get in each other's way. The electromechanical systems will be designed by the GEC Alstom people, which will include the vehicles. John Molam are doing the civil design and construction. AMEC are doing specific civil works, the depot and other facilities. Greater Manchester Buses are advising us and participating in the operational side of the railway and ensuring that the benefits of through ticketing and other operational issues are capitalised.
Preparatory work is already underway in the centre of Manchester, primarily to move sewers and other services out of the way before the light rail tracks are laid. The whole process of construction and converting the existing rail lines should take 2 years.
Of course, the actual starting of that 2-year period is a little bit unclear at this point in time because we're still awaiting for clearance by the Department of Transport. But with all our sort of hopes pinned that release of funds by the department will be forthcoming, let us say this autumn, then we would see a 2-year build programme starting, say, October, November of this year. If you ask me in terms of what would be the order of work, obviously we start very quickly with that consortium looking at the more detailed design in the early stages, particularly of the vehicle design and the station design, and we, as far as the public are concerned, they'd expect to see work commencing in the city centre on the track work and overhead work approximately, say, spring of next year. And then there'll be sort of segments of work. We've decided to do it in segmental form to ease the traffic problems in the city. Therefore, we'll have sort of a section starting, say, as I said, in early spring, from, say, Victoria Station to Piccadilly Gardens, and once that's complete, we'll do a leg from Piccadilly Gardens to the mainline station at Piccadilly Undercross stations it will be, and the last leg in the city will be again from the Piccadilly Gardens back through to GMX Viaduct. So we're doing it in those 3 segments, and that will take approximately 15 months to do the whole of those works.
What about the conversion of the existing lines from Bury and from Altrincham?
Well, that goes on in parallel, in fact, and the consortium will be working both on the Bury line and the Altrincham line during the periods of the construction work in the city. Where possible, we are trying to do that work in outer service hours because, as you'll appreciate, the vital links of the Bury line and the Altrincham line feed the commuters into the city, and want to try and avoid as much disruption as possible to those existing services. So again, that will be done out of working hours, being at weekends or in the evenings, where possible, although there may have to be, at certain times, shut down of the line for odd days when critical points are reached on the programme.
Perhaps the most unpredictable aspect of the scheme is just how well the light rail vehicles will fit into the city centre. The people behind the project say the stations will be designed to blend into the urban environment, and they believe the trams will be both safe and quick through crowded city streets.
They will be limited to the maximum speed you can do in the city, in other words 30 miles an hour. But the chances of being able to go that sort of speed, I mean the ordinary traffic doesn't normally go that sort of speed because of course at all times they're driven on site, so they have to be able to stop if a pedestrian suddenly jumps out or a car backs out of a side street. And there are fairly frequent stations and some quite sharp corners. So the chances of any significant speed are not there.
So will it actually be worth getting on it from a speed point of view then? I mean, cynics might say it'd be quicker to walk.
Oh no, it will be quicker, we expect. We expect quicker within the city, and certainly if at the moment your train terminates at Piccadilly Station or at Victoria Station, it will take you right into the city centre in about 5 minutes from those. And certainly be worth it for cross-city journeys. I don't expect it to be worth it to go from St Peter's Square to Piccadilly Gardens unless it's raining, or unless you want to do it for fun, and we hope you will do it for fun.
What about the safety aspects of the travel through the city centre? I mean, how will you ensure that people don't get knocked over and the thing doesn't collide with cars?
Well, the first thing is in all the detailed design. We've talked about the traffic management arrangements, we've talked about the segregation and the discussions we've had with the city engineer and the city planning officer. So it's designed to try and minimise potential for that. That's the first thing. The second thing, quite clearly, in the recruitment and the training of the drivers, we will have to take very great care that they drive progressively and carefully in the traffic, and they drive very much like a bus driver will drive today. You have to get through to adhere to a timetable, but at all times you've got to watch out for the pedestrians and what they might do unexpectedly, and indeed cars.
How quickly will these things be able to stop?
Well, in emergency, they'll be able to stop in their own length. So if somebody's shot straight out, completely blind round a corner, they can stop very quickly. They have 3 sets of brakes. But under normal circumstances, they have a deceleration rate of about 1.3 metres per second.
Certain areas, like for instance where it's going through Piccadilly Gardens and round the corner into Market Street, there will inevitably be some loss of space for pedestrians, which is a shame because they've broadened the pavements in recent years. We have some concern about that particular area.
Great care is being taken to ensure that everyone has a chance to use Metrolink, with disabled people and those with prams and pushchairs able to board the vehicles easily.
The existing stations, that is on the Bury line and the Altrincham line, we have looked at the means by which mobility impaired gain access to the platforms, and this will include both the provision of long ramps and also in certain situations lifts. There are problems with lifts on security, but again we have built into the specification that in fact there shall be closed circuit television watching the lifts to try to avoid difficulties with both people gaining access to those lifts and also for vandalism. Now in the city centre we have looked at a great number of options both from the continent and the States. We have seen some difficult problems on systems in the States where mechanical devices have been used to lift wheelchairs and prams onto vehicles, and it isolates the mobility impaired from the rest of travelling public. Here in Manchester we have produced a profile form of station which has a higher platform at one portion of the vehicle, and it gains access by a slow ramp to this high level, which gains access to 2 centre doors of the vehicle for mobility impaired and those with pushchairs and wheelchairs who need that sort of aided access onto the vehicle.
But Metrolink's success depends on attracting sufficient customers. 6 million journeys are made each year on the existing Bury and Altrincham lines. Forecasts for the numbers expected to use Metrolink range up to 12 million. The hope is that people will leave their cars at home and travel by Metrolink. The journey from Bury, for example, to the centre will take about 25 minutes. The light rail vehicles will run every 10 minutes through the day, every 5 in peak hours. But exactly how will the operators attract business?
Well, we hope to have quite a few parking spaces provided at stations. I mean, a number of stations now, like Bury and at Altrincham, for instance, already have car parks there. We hope to extend these or build new ones and provide parking at some places like Whitefield. And it will just depend how we can get along with the local authorities in providing these sort of spaces. So that's one element. We hope obviously to negotiate with British Railways and the bus companies for through ticketing on some form or other, so that it'll be a very attractive system, very easy to use and very open.
What about the capacity of the system? I mean, they're talking about a pretty high frequency of trams. Is it going to get people in and out of the city centre quickly?
It will do so quickly on the existing suburban rail services, yes. Once they get into the centre, I think it's going to get a lot slower because you're going to have a problem with traffic lights. But the other problem, I mean, you talk about capacity, and you raise a very important point, because the trams they're introducing on the Altrincham and Bury lines are going to be a lot smaller than the trains they replace. So they're expecting a larger proportion of passengers will have to stand than at present. Now, I'm very sceptical that this is actually going to attract more people onto those local rail services once they're converted to Metrolink. Manchester commuters are not by and large accustomed to standing. They've had it fairly cushy over the years compared to their counterparts in the southeast. And in Manchester there isn't the level of congestion in the city that would make motorists tolerate standing on the trains as the only way to get to work.
The crucial question is whether the light rail will stop the decline of the city centre, help to stimulate its revival. And again, if you look at other cities, notably in North America, the answer must be yes. Because one of the great advantages of light rail is it doesn't need car parking space. If you can get your customers to leave their car at a suburban station and go in by light rail to your shop, you can use all that space which you would have otherwise needed for car parking for retail. Much more practical, more economic, a nicer city centre.
Research that the PTE did show that one of the things that puts people off coming in by train, even though they've got a good train service now, is getting from the station in the city centre. And of course they can still use their car to get to Metrolink, and in fact I'm quite sure that parking at stations will be increased and there'll be greater facilities for people to drive to Metrolink and then use it where it'll be almost as good as a car for getting you right to work or right into the shops.
But how many people will need to use it to make it viable?
At the moment we've got about 8 million people using those lines. The best estimates we can make is that will increase to almost 12.5 million journeys as a result of putting on Metrolink. Quite clearly, at 12.5 million journeys, the system will be viable.
The North West public certainly showed an interest in the concept of light rail during a demonstration 2.5 years ago. 10,000 people travelled on a Docklands light rail vehicle which ran on a short stretch of freight line in Manchester. But when Metrolink starts for real in 1991, how much will it cost to use it?
We would expect at today's level the fares will be marginally up on the existing bus and train fares. They'll be slightly higher, probably 15, 20 pence higher, something like that, to reflect a better standard of vehicle, a more frequent service. After all, there's no service on Sunday on the Bury line, and the fact that they improve penetration of the city centre, so they reduce people's walking time between 5 and 15 minutes. So at today's fares, it would be slightly up on existing ones. The system has to work commercially. It's in a competitive environment. The buses are deregulated, and so we can't price ourselves ridiculously high, otherwise we won't get the passengers. And of course there's the competition from taxis and the private car.
But it's the overall way in which the scheme is being financed which is breaking new ground. Metrolink will cost about £90 million to build. The public sector, that's the government, the local passenger transport executive and possibly the EEC, will put in at least 3/4. The rest will come from the private firms making up the winning consortium. In return, they'll get a concession, probably for 15 years, to run the system and to take any profits. The ownership of the track and the rolling stock will rest with the passenger transport executive.
I think the government in this country have given all the indications that that's how they see the future. We're in the transportation business and on a long-term base, and we will have to recognise that desire. It so happens that I personally feel, in my company's view, is that that is quite a good way of doing it, and you do get the benefits of public sector experience with private sector management, and the combination of the two we think will be quite effective.
But there'll be no regulation of fare levels, with the power to raise them left entirely in the hands of the private operators, something which critics believe will leave the travelling public vulnerable.
The PTA have set the service standards, as I explained, sort of a 10-minute frequency throughout the day, and that was their requirement to do that so that they catch the social benefits as well as the financial benefits. And then really, by having it run by a private enterprise, you've got to give the freedom to set the fares and the marketing strategy and the publicity then to the operator to do. But the ceiling is what the market will bear, and you're in a competitive situation. If we price ourselves out, we shan't get the numbers of passengers, and we shan't get the value we've placed on the concession.
To begin with, all the bus companies, which probably cater for more public transport in Britain than any other mode of public transport, are now private, in the sense that even the publicly owned ones are privately run. I see no reason why they shouldn't be totally safeguarded, and obviously it's our job in designing the agreement for the concession to see that these safeguards are built in, but at the same time building in the flexibility to allow the private sector to make some return, which will no doubt persuade them to do better, even still.
If Metrolink does succeed, there are ambitious plans to extend it around Greater Manchester. Existing rail lines to Glossop and Marple could be converted to light rail. A disused line to Didsbury could be reopened, And most likely lines to Rochdale and Oldham would be converted, along with completely new lines to Salford Quays and Trafford Park. These would serve the planned new out-of-town shopping development near the M63 at Dumplington, and the government has indicated that final permission for the shopping centre may be linked to the building of the rail link. So plans for the extension of Metrolink there are being brought forward.
I'm pleased to say that I was recently able to write to the Department of the Environment saying that I have reasonable expectation of being able to build LRT from Cornbrook to Dumplington, and in reasonable time. That's the sort of colloquial words that the department tends to use. I would also like to say that it is my intention that there will be no extra additional ratepayers' money going into that scheme, and it is intended that that will be run substantially by private capital. After that, we will be looking at the eastern extensions, as we call them, from Piccadilly out towards Glossop, Hadfield, places of that area. There are, of course, other extensions planned as well. No doubt by the time we speak again, we'll even have more planned. As soon as you finish one lot, there are several others it's a continually moving target once you start.
There's no doubt that the local rail network around many parts of the northwest, particularly Manchester, has suffered from lack of investment in recent years. So, for example, the Bury to Victoria line would have needed money spending on it before long anyway. Metrolink is an ingenious attempt to improve public transport for some, at least, of Manchester's commuters at relatively low cost. Only time will tell if it turns out to be more than a passing phase or a long-term solution to the problem of city centre congestion.
It's going to improve accessibility to the central area. That in turn is going to make it easier for people to locate there, to get a job, or to find jobs, easier for employers to find employees, easier for people to get into the shops. So those benefits will benefit everybody.
It works very well in continental cities, it works very well in North American cities, and I don't see why it shouldn't work here.
It's time to look fresh. Instead of blindly carrying on with what you chose in the early 80s, when the political situation, the economic situation was very different. It's time to review what you're doing, and really we need a rail strategy for the whole of Manchester's railway system. Not saying, well, Metrolink's all we can do and we'll try and push it where we can, and, well, it's a shame about the rest, but we say we want a strategy for the whole system.
We would like to demonstrate not only to the public at large, but certainly to our own employees, the quality of the systems that we've been building around the world that they will ride on. Additionally, it provides them with a service to work, so we have the double benefit or the double penalty. If it's very good, they'll be very pleased, and we'll have a good relations with our employees and a clear demonstration of our competence. And if it was marginal or didn't work, then really, we would have a disbenefit twice.
Well, given the present circumstances of restricted public funds and the very real problems of congestion, it's a very good first step in order to help solve the problems in Manchester. But I would imagine that at some stage in the future, further investment will be necessary. But that will depend upon how well the light rail system is used as it's built and what funds are available at that time.
I have heard one local politician, whether out of truth or pride, I don't know, refer to this as, well, many years ago somebody built the ship canal, and then somebody built the airport, and now we're going to build Metrolink. I don't believe that the potential benefit to Greater Manchester as a whole can be assessed, and if it were assessed now, I have no doubt that it would be understated. Without it, it's one of those things that, the city won't grow as big as it could grow and become as productive as it could do without some form of mass transit.